Tonight, we journey to a time of ancient magic and untold mystery, to a land where towering mountains touch the heavens and rivers glimmer like silver. In the heart of this enchanted land lies a forbidden forest, hiding a tower that holds secrets wrapped in gold and shadows. Join me as we follow the brave farmer Rowan, drawn into a world of curses and beauty, to rescue a princess trapped by the enchanting yet dark power of a witch named Morganna. So settle in, close your eyes, and let the magic of this tale lull you to sleep, as each word wraps around you like a warm embrace. Once upon a time, in a land where the mountains touched the sky and rivers gleamed like silver threads, there lived a witch whose name was whispered in fear. Morganna. She was not like other witches, for her beauty was as dazzling as the sun, and her hair, spun from pure gold, cascaded down her back in shimmering waves. Yet, behind this beauty lay a dark heart, for Morganna had woven her magic into every strand of her golden hair. She used its enchanting glow to lure the unsuspecting into her grasp, trapping them in her high stone tower hidden deep in the forbidden forest. It was said that none who entered Morganna's domain ever returned. The tower stood tall and menacing, surrounded by thorny vines that grew wild and thick. Travelers who ventured too close were bewitched by the golden light shining from its single high window. And once they laid eyes upon Morganna's hair, they were lost to her forever. Far from the forest, in the heart of a peaceful kingdom, lived Princess Elara. Beloved by her people for her kindness and grace, Elara was the jewel of the realm. She had grown up with every comfort, and her laughter brought joy to the court. Yet, despite her happiness, she longed for adventure beyond the palace walls. The tales of distant lands and mysterious places filled her heart with a yearning for something more. One fateful evening, as the last rays of the sun dipped below the horizon, Princess Elara wandered beyond the castle grounds, drawn by a strange glow coming from the edge of the forest. The light flickered and beckoned, like a lantern swaying in the breeze, leading her deeper into the woods. Elara, curious and unafraid, followed it, unaware that she was being lured into a trap. The deeper she went, the brighter the light became, until she found herself standing before the base of Morganna's tower. The golden light pouring from the tower window bathed the trees in an eerie glow, and though a voice in her mind told her to turn back, Elara could not tear her eyes away. Suddenly, from above, a soft voice called out, "Who wanders so near to my tower?" Elara looked up and saw Morganna, her golden hair spilling out of the window like a river of sunlight. For a moment, the princess was struck speechless by the witch's beauty. "I am Princess Elara," she called back. "I saw the light and was drawn to it. Who are you? And why do you live in this lonely place?" Morganna's voice was sweet, but there was something sharp beneath it. "I am but a humble woman who has lived here for many years, forgotten by the world. Won't you come inside, dear princess? You must be tired after wandering the woods alone." Elara hesitated, but the pull of the golden light was too strong. She nodded, and as Morganna's golden hair slithered down the tower, forming a glowing ladder, Elara took hold of it. The moment her fingers touched the golden strands, a strange sensation washed over her, as though she were falling into a dream. Her feet lifted off the ground, and the next thing she knew, she was inside the tower, standing before Morganna. The witch smiled, her eyes gleaming with victory. "Welcome, Princess Elara," she said softly. "You shall stay here with me, forever." Too late, Elara realized her mistake. She tried to flee, but her body felt heavy, her limbs refusing to move. Morganna's magic had already taken hold. The princess, once free as the wind, was now a prisoner in the tower. Morganna laughed, her voice echoing off the cold stone walls. "No one will find you here, my dear. And even if they try, none will succeed in outwitting me." And so the kingdom mourned, believing their beloved princess lost forever, unaware that she was trapped in the tower of the witch with the golden hair. Many brave knights ventured into the forbidden forest, hoping to rescue her, but none returned. Morganna's magic was too strong, and her golden hair too tempting for any to resist. Thus began the tale of the clever farmer, the only one who could outsmart the witch and free the princess from her golden prison. But that is a story for another time. Far from the grand towers of the castle and the dark shadows of the forbidden forest, nestled in the rolling hills of a quiet village, lived a humble farmer named Rowan. He was not a man of riches or renown, but he was known for his cleverness and kindness. Rowan lived alone, tending to the fields that had been passed down through generations of his family, content with the simple rhythms of life. His days were spent in toil under the sun, and his nights in peaceful slumber beneath the stars. One night, as Rowan slept soundly after a long day's work, he was visited by a strange and vivid dream. In this dream, he found himself standing before a tall tower, wrapped in thorny vines, bathed in an otherworldly golden light. The light seemed to pulse and shimmer like liquid gold, almost too bright to gaze upon. From the high window of the tower, a voice called to him, soft and beckoning, yet filled with sorrow. "Help me," the voice whispered, though it was muffled, as if carried on the wind. "Only you can free me." Rowan tried to see who was calling, but all he could glimpse was a faint silhouette framed by the golden glow. Suddenly, the figure disappeared, and in its place, a woman with hair of pure gold appeared at the window. Her face was veiled in shadow, but her hair shone brighter than the sun. Rowan's heart leapt in his chest as her golden strands began to unravel, reaching toward him like a living thing. Before he could react, the golden hair wrapped around him, binding him in its warm, magical light. He woke with a start, his breath quick and his heart racing. The dream had felt so real, so tangible, that even now, in the quiet darkness of his small cottage, he could still feel the warmth of the golden strands. He sat up in bed, rubbing his eyes, trying to shake the strange vision from his mind. But no matter how hard he tried, the image of the golden-haired woman stayed with him. The next morning, Rowan went about his chores as usual, but the dream lingered at the edges of his thoughts. As he worked in the fields, his mind wandered back to the glowing tower and the voice that had called to him. Who was that woman? And why had she asked for his help? Later that day, Rowan visited the village elder, a wise old man who had lived longer than anyone could remember. The elder often spoke in riddles and ancient tales, his mind filled with the knowledge of the past. Rowan hoped that perhaps the elder could make sense of the dream that haunted him. After hearing Rowan's tale, the elder sat in silence for a long moment, his wrinkled hands resting on his cane. His eyes, clouded with age, stared out toward the distant forest, and he nodded slowly. The witch Morganna, he muttered under his breath, so faintly that Rowan almost didn't hear. The witch? Rowan asked, leaning closer. The elder sighed, his voice heavy with the weight of old memories. There is a tower deep in the forbidden forest where a witch lives, a witch with hair spun from gold. Her name is Morganna, and her power is great. It is said that none who look upon her hair can escape her grasp. Many have tried to rescue those she has trapped, but none have succeeded. Rowan frowned, feeling a chill creep down his spine. And the princess? He asked. Could the voice I heard be hers? The elder nodded gravely. Princess Ilara, the kingdom's beloved, was taken by the witch many moons ago. Many brave knights have ventured into the forest to rescue her, but all have failed. Morganna's magic is too strong, and her hair too beautiful to resist. The king has offered great rewards to anyone who can bring his daughter back, but none have returned. Rowan's heart sank. A princess, trapped by a witch with hair of gold. It seemed like a story from an old legend, yet his dream had felt so real, so urgent. Could it truly be that he, a simple farmer, had been called to this task? The elder placed a hand on Rowan's shoulder, his gaze steady. Do not be fooled by her beauty, Rowan. Morganna's magic is powerful, but there are ways to defeat her, ways that require not strength, but cleverness. You are not a knight, but you have something more valuable, your wits. If you choose to go, remember this. The key to breaking her magic may lie in what she treasures most. Rowan nodded, though uncertainty gnawed at his heart. Could he truly face the golden-haired witch and free the princess from her grasp? He didn't know, but something inside him had already begun to stir. the first flicker of courage. And so, with the weight of the elder's words resting heavily upon him, Rowan made his decision. He would venture into the forbidden forest and face the witch, not for the promise of gold or glory, but because something deeper called him to the task. For in his heart, he knew the dream had been no mere vision. It had been a summons. Rowan's journey into the forbidden forest began at the break of dawn, when the world was still quiet, and the mist hung low over the land like a silver veil. With little more than a cloak, a small pack of provisions, and the elder's warning echoing in his mind, Rowan made his way to the forest's edge. The village, with its familiar hills and fields, faded behind him as he stepped into the shadowy depths of the ancient wood. The forbidden forest was not like any ordinary woodland. The tree towered high, their twisted branches weaving together like gnarled hands, blocking out the sun. Strange noises echoed from unseen places, rustling leaves snapping twigs, and the occasional distant howl of an unknown creature. Rowan felt the weight of the forest's secrets pressing in on him with each step, but he kept his eyes fixed forward, determined to find the tower where the golden-haired witch held Princess Elara captive. For hours, Rowan wandered through the dense forest, the path disappearing and reappearing as if the forest itself were alive and intent on confusing him. The thick underbrush snagged at his clothes, and the dark, shadowy shapes seemed to shift in the corners of his vision. But Rowan's resolve remained unshaken. He knew the way forward was treacherous, yet he also knew that the golden-haired witch's tower was real, for he had seen it in his dream. As evening approached and the sky darkened, Rowan came to a small clearing. The trees thinned just enough for him to catch his first glimpse of the tower. It stood tall and foreboding, its stone walls covered in creeping vines, reaching up toward the sky like a clawed hand. High above, the single window of the tower glowed faintly with a golden light, casting long shadows across the forest floor. Rowan's breath caught in his throat. There it was, the tower from his dream, standing before him in eerie stillness. The light from the window flickered like a dying flame, and as Rowan crept closer, he saw the unmistakable shimmer of golden hair flowing down from the window, catching the last rays of the setting sun. The sight was both beautiful and terrifying, for he knew it was not an ordinary light, but Morganna's power, woven into every golden strand. He crouched low, hiding behind the dense bushes at the edge of the clearing, his heart racing. From his hidden vantage point, Rowan watched the tower for signs of movement. Morganna's golden hair swayed gently in the breeze, but there was no sign of the witch herself. The air was still, and the forest seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting for something to happen. Rowan knew he couldn't simply charge into the tower. Morganna's magic would overpower him in an instant. He had to think, to plan. His mind raced with possibilities, but one thing was clear. The witch's power was tied to her hair. He had seen it in his dream, and now he saw it before him, glowing like molten gold in the twilight. As he waited, watching the tower, a thought began to form in his mind. Morganna's golden hair was not just a symbol of her beauty and magic. It was her greatest strength, and perhaps her greatest weakness. If Rowan could find a way to disrupt the magic woven into those strands, he might have a chance to weaken her and set Princess Elara free. But how? Rowan recalled the stories the village elder had told him. Tales of old magic and the ways in which certain objects could disrupt enchantments. Iron, he thought. Iron had the power to break certain spells, to weaken the magic of witches and sorcerers. His plan began to take shape. He would need something made of iron, something small and sharp enough to cut through the witch's hair, to drain the magic from it. Rowan glanced back at the darkening forest behind him. It was too late to return to the village now, and he had no iron weapon with him. But perhaps the blacksmith in the village could forge something small and simple, like an iron comb that would serve his purpose. With a final glance at the tower and its glowing window, Rowan retreated into the forest shadows, careful not to make a sound. He would return, but first he had to prepare. Morganna was powerful, but he had something she did not expect. His wits. And with the right tools, he believed he could outsmart the witch and free the princess from her golden prison. As the tower faded from sight behind the thick trees, Rowan's heart swelled with a quiet, determined hope. He had come this far, and he would not turn back. The path to rescuing Princess Elara had only just begun. Rowan returned to the village under the cover of night, his mind still swirling with the vision of the tower and the golden-haired witch. His thoughts were fixed on the task ahead, for he now understood that brute force would not free Princess Elara. Only cunning and a well-devised plan could outsmart the witch Morganna. The next morning, Rowan went straight to the village blacksmith. The smith, an old friend, greeted him with a hearty laugh. But when Rowan explained his purpose, the blacksmith's face turned grave. "You mean to face the witch Morganna?" he asked, his voice low. "Many have gone into the forbidden forest seeking glory, but none have returned. What makes you think you'll succeed?" Rowan's eyes were steady as he replied, "I do not seek glory nor riches. I seek only to free the princess, and I believe her capture is bound to Morganna's golden hair. I need an iron tool, something simple yet sharp enough to sever the magic from her locks." The blacksmith looked doubtful, but he had known Rowan since childhood and trusted his sharp mind. With a slow nod, he agreed to help. Over the next few hours, the blacksmith forged a small iron comb, its teeth fine and pointed. designed to catch and pull through even the thickest hair. Rowan watched closely as the iron was heated and hammered into shape, knowing that this simple object might be the key to breaking the witch's curse. As the blacksmith worked, he spoke of old legends passed down from his father's father, stories of how iron could disrupt dark magic. "Witches fear iron," he said as he polished the comb. "It weakens their spells and breaks the bonds they cast. But be careful, Rowan. Morganna is no ordinary witch. Her hair holds great power, and you must not look upon it too long, lest you fall under her spell." Rowan thanked the blacksmith for his wisdom and left the forge with the iron comb safely tucked away in his pack. The weight of the tool felt reassuring, though he knew it would take more than just the comb to defeat Morganna. He had to outthink her, to find a way to get close without falling into her traps. That evening, Rowan returned to the village elder's hut. The elder was sitting by the fire, his wrinkled face illuminated by the flickering flames. When Rowan entered, the old man looked up and smiled knowingly, as though he had been expecting him. "I see you have returned from the forest," the elder said. "Did you find the tower?" "I did," Rowan replied, his voice hushed. "I saw the tower, and I saw her, the witch with golden hair. She is as powerful as the stories say, but I believe her hair is the source of her magic. I have prepared an iron comb, but I need your wisdom to understand how to use it against her." The elder leaned back in his chair, his eyes clouded with thought. "Morganna's magic is ancient," he said slowly. "She draws power not only from her hair, but from the light it captures. The golden strands reflect the sun, the moon, and even the stars. And through this light, she binds those who look upon her. You must find a way to dull that light, to weaken her hold. The iron will help, but it alone will not be enough." Rowan frowned deep in thought. "How can I dull her light? The forest is full of shadows, but the golden glow of her hair seems to pierce even the darkest night." The elder smiled, his eyes twinkling with the wisdom of many years. "Sometimes the answer lies in the simplest of things. The light of Morganna's hair is strongest when it is bathed in the sun. But what happens when the sun is hidden? When the clouds gather or the mist rolls in? Her magic wanes with the light. If you can find a way to shield her hair from the light, even for a moment, you may be able to weaken her long enough to act." Rowan nodded, the pieces of his plan falling into place. He would need to wait for the right moment, a time when the sun was hidden and Morganna's power was at its weakest. Perhaps, if the skies darkened with storm or mist, he could use the iron comb to sever the magic from her golden hair and break the curse that bound the princess. Thanking the elder once more, Rowan left the hut and returned to his cottage. The moon hung high in the sky, casting a pale light over the village, but Rowan's mind was already racing toward the forest once again. He had his tool and he had his plan. Now all he needed was patience and the courage to face Morganna when the time came. For though he was but a simple farmer, Rowan knew that cleverness, not strength, was the true key to defeating the witch. And so he prepared himself for the journey that would soon take him back into the heart of the forbidden forest, where the golden-haired witch awaited her next victim. The days that followed were marked by a strange stillness, as if the world itself was holding its breath in anticipation of the battle to come. Rowan spent his time quietly preparing, gathering provisions, and making sure his tools were in place. All the while, watching the sky for signs of a change in weather. He knew that only when the light was dimmed, when clouds or mist veiled the sun, could he hope to confront Morganna and break the curse. It was on the 4th day that the clouds began to gather, thick and heavy in the sky, casting the village in an eerie grey light. Rowan knew this was the moment he had been waiting for. He strapped the small iron comb to his belt, pulled his cloak tightly around him, and set off for the forbidden forest once again. The path through the forest seemed even darker than before, the trees looming tall and menacing, their twisted branches creaking in the cold wind. But Rowan pressed on, his mind focused on the task ahead. He moved with quiet purpose, his steps light and careful, for he knew that the witch's magic could sense even the smallest disturbance. As he neared the tower, the sky grew darker still, and the first drops of rain began to fall, gentle at first but quickly turning into a heavy drumming downpour. Rowan smiled grimly to himself. This was exactly what he had hoped for. The storm would weaken Morganna's power, just as the village elder had said. Now, he would have to act quickly before the storm passed and the sun reappeared. When he reached the clearing where the tower stood, he saw that the golden glow from Morganna's hair had dimmed, the rain dampening its once bright light. The shimmering strands hung limply from the tower window, their usual brilliance dulled by the storm. Rowan crouched low behind a fallen tree, watching carefully for any sign of movement. The witch was nowhere to be seen, but he knew better than to think she was unaware of his presence. Summoning his courage, Rowan stepped forward into the clearing. "Morganna!" he called, his voice steady, but loud enough to echo through the trees. "I have come for Princess Elara. Let her go, or face the consequences." For a moment, there was only the sound of the rain falling, the wind whistling through the trees. Then, from high above, a soft mocking laugh floated down from the tower window. Morganna's voice, though weakened, still carried the same sharp edge as it always had. "Another fool come to test his luck," she sneered. "You think you can outwit me, farmer? Many have tried before you, and all have failed. What makes you any different?" Rowan didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into his pack and pulled out a small mirror, angling it so that he could see Morganna's reflection without looking directly at her hair. He had no intention of falling into her trap, but he needed her to believe he was vulnerable. "I may be a farmer," Rowan called back, "but I know the secret of your power, Morganna. It lies in your golden hair. Without it, you are nothing." There was a pause, and then a hiss of anger. Morganna appeared at the window, her face twisted with fury, her golden hair whipping through the rain like strands of liquid sunlight. But even from a distance, Rowan could see the truth. The rain had weakened her magic, and the glow of her hair was no longer as bright or dangerous as it once had been. "And what do you plan to do, farmer?" Morganna spat, her voice laced with venom. "You think you can sever my power with your bare hands?" Rowan smiled, though he kept his face hidden beneath the hood of his cloak. "I don't need my hands, Morganna," he said, reaching for the iron comb at his belt. "I have something far more powerful than you could ever imagine." With that, he took a step closer to the tower, the iron comb glinting in his hand. Morganna's eyes narrowed, and for the first time, Rowan saw a flicker of fear cross her face. She recoiled slightly, her golden hair curling back toward the window as though it could sense the danger. "You wouldn't dare," she whispered, her voice trembling with uncertainty. "Oh, I would," Rowan replied, his voice calm and confident. "I have no fear of you, Morganna. Your magic may be powerful, but it is no match for iron." He took another step forward, and this time, Morganna let out a shriek of fury. Her hair, weakened by the rain, lashed out like a snake, trying to ensnare Rowan before he could get any closer. But Rowan was ready. He sidestepped her attack and, with a swift motion, brought the iron comb through the air, catching a strand of her golden hair in its teeth. Morganna screamed as the iron made contact, the magic in her hair sizzling and crackling like a fire being doused with water. Rowan pulled the comb through her hair with all his strength, and as he did, the golden strands began to wither and fade, their once brilliant light extinguished by the power of the iron. With a final desperate cry, Morganna retreated into the tower. Her magic broken, Rowan stood at the base of the tower, the rain pouring down around him, and knew that the first part of his plan had succeeded. But the battle was not yet won. Princess Elara was still trapped inside the tower, and Morganna, though weakened, would not give up so easily. Rowan had outsmarted the witch once, but he would have to be even cleverer to rescue the princess and escape the tower alive. Rowan stood at the base of the tower, breathing heavily, as the last echo of Morganna's scream faded into the rain. The iron comb, now dull from the battle, rested in his hand. The golden strands it had caught shriveled and lifeless. He had succeeded in weakening Morganna's magic, But the witch was far from defeated. Somewhere in the shadows of the tower, she would be nursing her anger, preparing for another trick. And still, Princess Elara remained trapped inside. As Rowan gazed up at the high window, the faint flicker of golden light told him Morganna's power had not been completely extinguished. The rain continued to fall in heavy sheets, but even through the storm, he could hear the eerie silence that surrounded the tower. It was as if the very air held its breath, waiting for what would come next. Determined, Rowan made his way to the tower's door. An ancient slab of oak bound in rusted iron. The door was locked, of course, but Rowan had anticipated this. He had brought a small set of tools with him, a few simple metal picks, crafted with care. Though he was no thief, he had learned some skills from the traders who passed through his village, and with steady hands he set to work on the lock. The rain beat down harder, soaking through his cloak and making the task more difficult. But Rowan's fingers worked with patience and precision. After a few moments, there was a soft click, and the lock gave way. He pushed the door open, the heavy wood groaning on its ancient hinges. Inside, the air was thick with a strange, musty scent, as if the tower itself had not seen the light of day in centuries. Rowan stepped into the dim hallway, lit only by the occasional flicker of Morganna's fading magic. The walls were cold and damp, and the narrow staircase spiraled up into darkness. Every step seemed to echo with the weight of countless years, and Rowan could feel the oppressive presence of the witch's power all around him. As he ascended the stairs, his heart pounded in his chest. He knew that Morganna was somewhere above, lurking in the shadows, waiting to strike. The iron comb had weakened her, but the witch was still dangerous. Rowan kept one hand on the hilt of a small knife he had brought with him, though he knew steel would be of little use against her magic. It gave him a sense of security. The staircase seemed to wind endlessly upward, each step carrying him closer to the witch's lair. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Rowan reached a narrow landing where a single door stood before him. The door was carved with strange symbols, runes that pulsed faintly with an otherworldly light. He knew this must be where Princess Elara was imprisoned. Taking a deep breath, Rowan pushed the door open. The room beyond was small and bare, with stone walls and a high arched ceiling. At the far end of the room, bathed in the dim glow of a fading magical light, stood a tall figure draped in a shimmering cloak of gold. It was Morganna. Her hair, though no longer as brilliant as it once was, still held traces of its former power. The strands floated around her like thin threads of light, flickering with anger. Her eyes, sharp and furious, met Rowan's, and for a moment there was nothing but silence between them. "You dare enter my tower?" Morganna hissed, her voice low and dangerous. "You think your little iron comb has bested me? Fool! My magic is ancient, far older than you can imagine. Rowan stood his ground, his hand tightening around the knife at his side. Your magic may be old, Morganna, but it is fading. You can no longer hold Princess Elara here against her will. Morganna laughed, a cold, hollow sound that echoed off the stone walls. You think you can free her? The princess belongs to me now, and no man, no matter how clever, can take her from me. With a sudden flick of her wrist, Morganna sent a strand of her golden hair lashing toward Rowan. He dodged to the side, the hair missing him by inches, but he knew that the witch was playing with him. Though weakened, she was still formidable, and her anger made her all the more dangerous. Rowan needed to act quickly. His eyes darted around the room, searching for any sign of Princess Elara, but the princess was nowhere to be seen. Was it possible that Morganna had hidden her away? Or perhaps she was under a spell that made her invisible to his eyes. As Morganna's hair lashed out again, Rowan ducked and rolled toward the far side of the room, trying to get closer to the witch without being ensnared by her magic. He had one chance. If he could get close enough to use the iron comb again, perhaps he could sever the last of her power. But Morganna seemed to sense his plan. With a sharp cry, she summoned all of her remaining strength, and her golden hair rose up around her like a shimmering shield, creating a barrier between herself and Rowan. "You cannot win, farmer," she snarled, her eyes flashing with malice. "I will not be defeated by the likes of you." Rowan paused, his mind racing. He could not get close enough to use the comb, and Morganna's magic was still too strong to overcome directly. He needed another plan, a way to outsmart her, just as the elder had said. And as he stood there, watching the witch's hair swirl and pulse with fading light, an idea began to form. He would need to trick Morganna into undoing her own magic. But to do that, he would have to be more clever than he had ever been before. With a calm voice, Rowan called out, "Perhaps you're right, Morganna. Perhaps I am no match for your power. But I have one last trick to play." And so, the final game began. Rowan stood still, his mind working quickly, as Morganna's golden hair coiled around her, glowing faintly in the dim light of the tower room. The witch was powerful, even in her weakened state, and Rowan knew that brute strength or force would never overcome her. She had lived for centuries, outwitting countless brave souls who had come before him. But there was one thing Rowan had learned from his life as a farmer. Sometimes the best way to deal with a clever adversary was to play along with their game, just long enough to turn it in your favor. With a deep breath, Rowan lowered the iron comb he held in his hand and spoke calmly. "You're right, Morganna. I cannot defeat you. Your power is far beyond anything I could have imagined." Morganna's eyes gleamed with satisfaction. She had expected resistance, another futile attempt to strike her down. But now, seeing Rowan seemingly give up, she let out a cruel laugh, her voice echoing through the cold stone room. "So, you finally understand, farmer? You were a fool to challenge me. My magic is ancient, bound to the very light of the sun and stars. No mortal can break the spell I have woven." Rowan nodded slowly, his heart pounding as he took a step back, pretending to retreat. "I should never have come here," he said, his voice steady, though his mind raced with the plan forming in his head. "But before I go, Morganna, allow me to make one last request." The witch raised an eyebrow, her interest piqued. She was used to this, the final plea of those who had tried and failed to defeat her. She had heard 100 such requests over the centuries, and each one had ended the same way. "Speak then," Morganna said, her voice dripping with arrogance. "What is it you ask for before I send you to the same fate as all the others?" Rowan took a step forward, careful not to appear too eager, and bowed his head respectfully. "I ask only to gaze upon your golden hair once more before I leave. It is, after all, the most beautiful sight I have ever seen. Surely a simple farmer like myself deserves one last glimpse of such beauty before I meet my end." Morganna's smile widened, her vanity stirred by Rowan's words. She had always prided herself on the power and allure of her golden hair, which had brought kings and knights to their knees. This humble farmer's request flattered her, and in her arrogance, she did not see the cleverness behind his words. "Very well," she said, stepping closer to the window where her golden hair shimmered faintly in the dying light of the storm. "Gaze upon my hair, if that is your wish. But know this, foolish farmer. Once you have seen its full glory, you will be mine, just as Princess Elara is." Rowan nodded again, his eyes carefully averted so that he wouldn't fall under the spell of her golden strands. "Thank you, Morganna," he said softly, his hand slipping toward the pouch at his side. "You are too kind." As the witch turned slightly to admire her own reflection in the small mirror beside the window, Rowan moved swiftly. With a single quick motion, he pulled from his pouch a small vial of ash, the remnants of a fire he had prepared just for this moment. Before Morganna could react, Rowan threw the ash into the air and it scattered across the room, landing on her golden hair. The moment the ash touched her hair, the magic within it began to fizzle and fade. Morganna screamed in fury, but it was too late. The ash, made from the ironwood Rowan had burned back in the village, sapped the last of her magic, dulling the golden glow of her hair to a lifeless pale color. "You!" Morganna shrieked, her voice filled with rage and disbelief. "What have you done?" Rowan stepped back, his heart racing. "I've taken your power, Morganna. Your golden hair may have once held the magic of the stars, but it is nothing without the light. And now, even that is gone." For the first time, Morganna's face showed fear. Her golden hair, once her greatest strength, now hung limp and dull around her shoulders. The power she had wielded for so many centuries was fading fast, and without it, she was nothing more than a shadow of her former self. Rowan knew he had little time before Morganna would try to strike back, even in her weakened state. He had succeeded in diminishing her power, but she was still dangerous. He needed to find Princess Elara and escape the tower before the witch could recover. "Where is she?" Rowan demanded, his voice firm. "Where is the princess?" Morganna, her eyes burning with hatred, remained silent for a moment, unwilling to give up the last secret she held. But as her power drained from her, she realized she had no choice. With a bitter laugh, she pointed toward a hidden door at the far end of the room. "She's there!" Morganna spat. "But you'll never free her in time." Without another word, Rowan rushed toward the door. Behind it, he found a small chamber dimly lit and cold. There, lying on a simple bed, was Princess Elara, her eyes closed, trapped in an enchanted sleep. Her beauty was undiminished, but the curse that Morganna had placed on her held her in a deep, magical slumber. Rowan knelt beside the princess, his mind racing. He had outsmarted the witch and weakened her magic, but now he had to figure out how to break the spell that held Elara. And time was running out, for he knew Morganna would not be defeated so easily. The final challenge awaited, and Rowan would have to be cleverer than ever to save the princess and escape the tower. Rowan knelt beside Princess Elara, her face serene and still beneath the curse that bound her in sleep. Her chest rose and fell softly, her beauty untouched by the long days of enchantment. But time was not on Rowan's side. Morganna's curses were ancient, and even though the witch's magic had been weakened, the spell holding the princess was still powerful. Rowan knew he had little time before Morganna recovered enough strength to lash out once more. His mind raced as he examined the room. It was simple, almost bare, save for the bed on which Elara lay and a small table that held an ornate silver mirror and a thin candle, its flame flickering dimly. He searched for a clue, anything that could break the spell, but nothing seemed out of place. Nothing except Morganna's lingering presence that still clung to the air like a dark fog. Rowan turned back to the princess. He could feel the weight of her enchantment, a force much older and darker than he had expected. "How can I break this curse?" he murmured to himself, frustration building. He had already come so far, outwitting Morganna and escaping her traps. He refused to let the princess remain a prisoner of this tower. Then, the village elder's words came back to him. The key to breaking her magic may lie in what she treasures most. Rowan glanced toward the door, where Morganna had hidden in the next room, no doubt plotting her revenge even now. The witch's magic was bound to her golden hair, her vanity, her desire to be admired. Perhaps the answer lay there, in the one thing Morganna could never resist, herself. Rowan's gaze fell upon the silver mirror on the table, its surface gleaming even in the dim light. An idea began to take shape. Morganna had always been consumed by her own beauty, drawing strength from her golden hair and the light it reflected. What if Rowan could turn that very vanity against her? He stood quickly, taking the mirror into his hands. The reflection was clear and perfect, capturing every detail of the room behind him. Morganna had once gazed into it, likely admiring her own beauty, but now it would serve a different purpose. If her magic was tied to her image, perhaps her downfall would come from the same source. Holding the mirror, Rowan strode toward the door and called out, "Morganna! You claimed I could never free the princess, but you've forgotten the one thing that binds you to this place." There was a hiss from the shadows beyond, and Morganna stepped into the doorway, her eyes glowing with malice. "You dare speak to me after what you've done?" she snarled. Her golden hair, now dulled and lifeless, hung in thin strands around her face. Her power was fading, but her rage remained as sharp as ever. "I will make you suffer for your insolence, farmer. You cannot escape me." Rowan remained calm, though his heart pounded in his chest. He raised the mirror, its surface gleaming in the low light. "Look, Morganna," he said, his voice steady but challenging. "See yourself as you are now." Morganna's eyes narrowed as the mirror caught her reflection. At first, she recoiled, instinctively turning her head away. But something deeper pulled at her, a twisted need to see herself, to confirm that her beauty had not been destroyed. Slowly, hesitantly, she glanced into the mirror, and there, staring back at her, was not the radiant beauty she had been for centuries, but the withered reflection of a witch whose magic was fading. Her golden hair, once the source of her power, now looked brittle and dull, no longer shimmering with light. The lines of age that she had hidden for so long now showed on her face, and her eyes, once bright with wickedness, seemed hollow and cold. Morganna let out a strangled cry, stepping back from the mirror in horror. "No, this cannot be!" she screamed, her hands flying to her face as if to shield herself from the truth. But it was too late. The more she looked, the more her power ebbed away, as though the mirror had revealed the depth of her vanity and drained the last of her strength. Rowan stepped forward, still holding the mirror before her. "You have spent your life drawing power from your beauty, Morganna," he said softly. "But now it is your undoing. You cannot hide from what you truly are." With a final desperate scream, Morganna stumbled back, her hands clutching at her golden hair as it withered further, turning grey and brittle like dried grass. Her body began to tremble as the magic she had held for so long unraveled before her eyes. "No," she whispered, her voice faint. "This cannot be." But it was. As the mirror revealed her true self, Morganna's body seemed to crumble, her once beautiful form dissolving into shadows and dust. Within moments, the golden-haired witch was no more, and the room fell silent. Rowan lowered the mirror, his heart racing but his mind clear. The witch was defeated, and her spell was broken. He rushed back to Princess Ilara's side. The curse that had held her in sleep was lifting, and slowly her eyes fluttered open. She blinked in the dim light, her gaze settling on Rowan, confusion and relief mingling in her expression. Where am I?" she whispered. Rowan smiled gently. "You're safe now, Princess," he said, his voice soft. "The witch is gone." With that, the tower, once filled with dark magic, seemed to breathe with new life. The rain outside had stopped, and the first rays of sunlight began to filter through the small window, casting a warm, golden glow over them both. The storm had passed, and Morganna's dark reign over the tower was at last undone.